everyone. It's great to be here. I am Jessica, and we're here with Chamath, who probably needs no introduction, founder of Social Capital now. They dropped the plus, so breaking news.
We're no longer trying to plus anything. It's just...
Yeah, it makes it so much. Now we need emojis and names, right?
Yeah.
That would be the new.
Yeah.
You guys are. But anyway, Chamath has an awesome track record of investing in the healthcare space as well as more broadly sort of socially important and valuable businesses. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about how you approach those kinds of investments and if that's different from maybe other types of tech investments. But starting with healthcare broadly, you've said before that this industry is full of crappy services, experiences, haven't minced your words. So give us the high-level view of sort of the opportunity through your eyes.
So I think it's probably better to frame this in the context of how we define our purpose. So, the mission of Social Capital as a firm is, we want to try to alleviate a lot of human suffering. And if we do that, we think that we end up creating a more fair and equitable world. And if we do that, we think those are the business models that actually make you hundreds of billions of dollars. So you kind of just, when you look at sort of the business models that seem to be winning now, they're really defined by these things that level the playing field and allow people to get to the start line. So within healthcare, that's the sort of framework in which we tried to figure out how we should be applying our time and our energy and our capital. And the way that we started initially actually was literally asking ourselves, where are people spending money, or where is money being spent, and where are the least correlation between investment and outcomes? And the first way that we tried to define that was really just by looking at the substantive chronic diseases that kept coming up over and over again as the things that were these massive impediments to progress, to fairness, to equality, to having people at the starting line. And you end up with obesity, diabetes, chronic heart failure, asthma, COPD. And in that, what we decided was that obesity really didn't make sense to us. We didn't think that it was a attackable problem.
And around what year is this?
This is like 2000 and, well, I started to have these ideas in 2010 when I was still at Facebook, but it really crystallized for myself and my co-founders when we started it in 2011. And so within that framework of those four, we eliminated obesity, and then we said, okay, let's figure out something that's really interesting in those other three categories. And we kind of stumbled into this business model accidentally. So this is a very long-winded answer, I apologize. In my family, my dad, who passed away October 30th, had diabetes for 30 years. Amongst my 17 aunts and uncles, 11 of them had diabetes. And so the first thing that I really did once I left Facebook is I helped co-found this company called Gluco, which was a diabetes company. And we started very accidentally, which was, let's just get all of the data off the glucometer. And our suspicion was that if we could aggregate enough data, you'd be able to forensically attack this disease by giving interventional tools, by giving forecasting, by giving predictability to a disease that otherwise left untreated. And people would check themselves every day maybe, but the docs and the endocrinologists would see these people once every 6 months. And what we found was, over time, that business model made sense because what we were doing was taking a very low-cost sensor, putting it on an individual, capturing some very critical data around a specific disease state, sending it into the cloud, aggregating it across populations, and then acting. And
who pays in the model there?
In that model, what we also found was, so when we first went to market direct to consumer, it was a total failure. We had an Amazon store. We were trying to single source these like little Bluetooth modules. We tried to sell it. Nobody would buy it. And then we finally stumbled into a payer who said, I mean, that's like worth $10 PM to us. And all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and we're like, oh my God, that's $120 a year. And we were trying to sell this little module for like a few bucks. So that's when we realized, okay, the real business is in building these cloud-based solutions for provider and payer systems. And what we really need to do is build very non-invasive, low-cost sensors that can capture the data. So that's what we did in asthma, COPD. We did the same thing in diabetes, and we're in the midst of doing the same thing now in chronic heart failure. Same business model. And in order of success, I would say, diabetes has done unbelievably well for us. Asthma, COPD, I think, is moving in the right direction, and CHF is a little early. And so that was really the first thrust. And we kind of said, okay, let's put, $50 to $100 million to work, roughly in that general idea, and see what happens around chronic diseases. And then we went to the other end of the spectrum, and we said, let's just take a bunch of, really binary, low probability bets on things that could be important. One of them was precision medicine, and one of them was kind of like a new kind of athletic sensor. And so that's how we started, and that's largely been how it's played out. And what we're finding is that sensor business model seems to be the one for us that we feel the most comfortable in. We're willing to take lots of capital risk. We're building really good relationship amongst a lot of these payers and providers who now trust us, that when we come to them with a specific disease state, we know what we're talking about. So that's kind of how it started,
How do you define success in that market, taking, say, sensors and payers? Like, what are you guys looking for in terms of your expectations for those businesses and in terms of growth?
This is a great question. I mean, I think this is the thing with all businesses. You have to be able to define the critical metric that defines the core product value of the business. And revenue is a lagging indicator that reflects the magnitude of the product market fit. And so in our case, in our precision medicine company, this company called SciAps, we literally talk about lives saved. And the reason is because we had this massive longitudinal trial with Intermountain. And what we found was that if you used our platform at the point of care around cancer genomics, you had 75% of all patients at Intermountain, this is like one of the best hospitals in the world, were getting the wrong drug or dosage. You had a 10 to 15% absolute right off the bat reduction of cost. And if you were like a metastatic, stage 3 cancer patient, you lived twice as long. And the minute I saw that, I said, great, that's our metric from now on. Every board meeting starts with how many lives saved. Mm-hmm. That's it. Fuck the revenue that happens like as a byproduct.
Okay. Now, are you doing that
saved.
because you're a good person or a good businessman, right? So how do you think about that?
I would hope that it's both. Okay. But I really think like if we just focus on lives saved and get that to be as high as possible, we'll make billions of dollars. I'm convinced like our healthcare portfolio will be worth tens of billions of dollars. It's hard sometimes for other investors to believe that. I believe that, and I think we're the same rational person that invested in Slack in the Series A, so I feel like we're pretty good investors.
There's a lot of barriers in the way in healthcare, though, right? So, or not. So there's the view out there that it's just, it's a mess, right? In terms of who the customer is, the
thing is, like, this is like whether, I may be misphrasing this, but I think Warren Buffett said this. I could be wrong. Someone will correct me on Twitter. It's way better to be long-term greedy than short-term greedy. And I think the problem with Silicon Valley, and we've talked about this a lot, is that our brethren, broadly defined, the venture community, is very short-term greedy. And so they just don't have the courage to be in a company for 10 years a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because they are these functional employees of other people's money, and so they just want to make a decision that doesn't cost them their job. And we can debate whether that's right or wrong, and in many situations we see that kind of decision-making pervade how decisions get made. But in this specific case, it has a hugely negative implication because the things that should be built and funded don't. And that has massive systemic issues that compound and compound and compound and affect huge amounts of the population.
Right, and you can argue that startups, some of that research can't happen in startups, right? Because of the short-term focus or so. That's one of the themes I've been wondering about, like, where is this innovation going to happen? Because even the long-term capital isn't always that long-term.
You're absolutely right. Like, I think we're long-term capital, but I had a situation this week that really disappointed me, which was I got an inbound email from a guy that I'm not going to say who it is, but we would all know, you deeply respect him. And he said, this is a great company. They're on the cutting edge. They're doing something in CRISPR. And the first draft is, wow, love it. I think CRISPR is too immature, probably not a great fit. And then right before I sent it, I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, we're supposed to be that last beacon, you know? We're supposed to be that safe harbor who can take the 15-year bet on something like CRISPR. And so I was like, you know, and then I was like, I caught myself. And so,
but you're not, you're a fund. You have investors. You have returns, right? So, like, I mean, this I guess maybe gets to the right structure for funding this stuff, right? You could make an argument that you shouldn't throw money at everything that could be. So how do you balance that? You know?
I think, well, the way that we balance it is that, you know, we put ourselves at risk. So we're the largest investors in our funds. It's, 25% of every dollar, which is painful, but it forces us to make these important decisions about where do we stand on these issues morally? Because if we stand on the side of saying we came to this with a mission and a purpose to fix a problem, to, create a structural solution to reducing A1C, or to create, the pathway for people with asthma and COPD to actually not suffer from chronic respiratory issues, or people that have cancer to actually get the best quality of care using cutting-edge genetics and genomics, then that's what we do. And when there's discomfort, then we have to find other capital partners who believe what we believe. That's what we need to do. We can't capitulate at the 11th hour. Now, doesn't mean that a lot of everything's going to work, and doesn't mean we make all the right decisions all the time, but we've given ourselves. That's the other thing we talk about this all the time as a team. We've done so many things that have made short-term massive profits. That's why we especially have to go to the extreme on the other side. Because if we don't, nobody is going to be there. And this stuff just will die on the vine, and that's not right, because it's not like another consumer internet business model to deliver you brownies at 11 p.m. If that business doesn't get started, nobody suffers. But when this stuff doesn't get started, people suffer. They die. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And so who else is going to do it?
Well, it's great. I mean, these are good questions. We're glad he's doing it. So what are you looking for in the earliest of stages? I mean, how do you decide what to invest in and what not to invest in?
This is such a great question. Okay, so we went through this offsite. So we went through an offsite, and the whole point of the offsite was to basically push on a lot of our tendencies, which is, you can mean revert even without thinking about it. So mean reversion for us is risk aversion, and, funding the nth brownie delivery business when we should be funding cancer or something else. Okay.
And also, there are probably a lot of cancer things that come your way too, right? Or maybe not a ton, but within the.
So what we said was, okay, we have to find a way of actually isolating where we should apply our most precious resource, which is not money, it's just our time. And, the group of us, we're a very eclectic, quirky bunch of folks, but whenever we get into a room and we kind of grind through an issue, we get to really good answers. Not always right, but we get to a good answer. And so we came out with this very simple rubric, which is, okay, we have to be able to say, first of all, if we're going to talk about any company now, it has to be in a one-pager. And let me tell you something. Try to write anything substantive in a one-pager. What you realize is it is really hard to capture something simply, precisely, crisply on one page. And when you try to do it just on one page, it forces us to get clarity, and we say you have to answer the following three questions. Could it theoretically touch a billion people? Mm-hmm. Could the company theoretically, be worth $100 billion? And is there at least one extremely special person that's running the company? And the best answers that we can give are possibly, probably, possibly, And
why 100 billion? Just wondering. I mean, it's a nice round, massive number, but
because I think it's intellectually tractable without being crazy. I first started with, could it be $1 trillion business in 35 years? And people looked at me like, that makes no sense. Okay. So then we were like,
100 billion it is.
I just kept iterating until someone was like, yeah, 100. But the point is that allows us to actually clarify quickly how to spend time. Mm-hmm. And so in the case of this CRISPR thing. It's yes, and now it's we don't know, because we don't know how to judge those people who are capable today, because we don't know what the true benchmarks on the road will be to, genetically engineering, meaning, for example, in that company, how do you judge someone's morality? How do you judge their long-term ethics? How do you judge how those ethics may change if they are the ones that are in control of something like that? I don't know how to judge that. But that's an example. Another example, which we just went through, was, we saw this really early stage company, 3 people, and they had come up with a very precise and very novel way of detecting early pregnancy factor. And it's like 10,000 times as robust and more sensitive than like a Clear Blue Easy or First Response. And so the result of it is something that can test for pregnancy within 4 hours of intercourse. And you're like, that's pretty crazy. 4 hours is pretty insane. And so, my memo was, could it reach 1 billion people? Possibly. Could it be worth 100 billion? Possibly. Is there somebody special there? Probably. And we went through the whole thing, and we're trying to get it done right now. Don't fucking intercept it, you leech VCs who are out here. Okay, you're all imposters. Okay. These deals are for us to do, not you.
And what's a well, actually, no, continue.
No, so it's like, so now we're trying to get it done. It's like, and I'm just like, it's incredible because like what they've done is like, it's like it's not novel science. It's very well-defined science. It's been around for, 30 years, and they've just have like an engineering approach, which is quite novel. And it's like really cool. And like, so we're like, it's a ton of risk. It could take 5 or 6 or 7 years. And we were just like, well, let's just pre-fund these guys all the way through the FDA process. That's the other thing we've learned, which is, when we were first learning about healthcare investing, we didn't really understand the implications of the FDA. And what looks like now is going to be one of our most successful outcomes, which is this diabetes company called Gluco, almost died. And it died on the vine because we had, a bunch of cease and desists. We had them pull our products. We had, incremental approvals at every step of the way. It cost way more money than we anticipated, to the point where with my partners and I, we didn't really understand. And we said, wow, we can't fund this anymore. So my wife and I had to personally fund them. Again, because I went back to, this is killing my entire family. I have to do something. And, but now we know. So now we know how to allocate capital properly, which is also another thing that I think some investors have run into.
Allocating capital, so what's changed with the FDA? How's your approach changed?
So like now it's like we think about this as like, okay, this is probably like a, if they're asking for 10, we're like, guys, let's make a $50 million decision here. We'll give them 10, they'll give them 20, then we'll give them, 20 more, but this is a $50 million decision. Make a $50 million decision right here.
Do you think the FDA needs to change their approach to any of this? Like, what would be your dream scenario on the regulatory front?
I mean, it's like, so we have a CE regulatory framework in Europe, which is pretty lightweight. In places like Hong Kong, there is no framework at all. I mean, you can kind of basically do whatever you want, it looks like. And it's not as if people are dying left and right in any of those countries in ways that they're not dying here left to right. And in many cases, there are more people dying here left and right in ways that are actually preventable in those places. So I think we almost have to take a step back and ask ourselves, have we done what is necessary to allow populations to thrive on a mass scale? And I think there has to be this almost like bifurcated pathway, which is like, there is like a certain class of things that I suspect should be in some form of rigorous longitudinal trial, but there's such a ossified infrastructure around it that it's just so, like for example, there was an article in Forbes or Fortune about a bunch of guys who are creating like basically what seems like Ponzi schemes around drugs and buying orphan drugs. Is that right? Like, I think the example was like an Alzheimer's drug. It's got a $4 billion market cap. Well, we know that there's a 99.99% failure in all Alzheimer's drugs. Why is this drug any different? Why is that company worth more than, I don't know, pick your favorite startup that's actually doing something and generating revenue and whatever? There's no revenue. There's no pipeline. There's just a drug and a story. But the regulatory framework has created the ability for a company like that to go public and financiers to capitalize on that. So I just think like we can't have the way the system works today because it's not exactly working for everybody. And so the protectionism has to kind of revert to something that's slightly different. Like, and I don't know what the answer is, but it's otherwise what will happen is most of us will build quality systems, launch in Europe, figure out how to go to China, figure out how to, frankly, going into Southeast Asia where we have direct relationships with all the governments and they can just fast track us. And then what happens is, unfortunately, these developed markets in the United States get starved of the actual advancements that are actually happening on its soil, which is quite tragic.
Are you seeing that? Are your startups starting outside?
Absolutely. And when we think about now funding these things, the most important decision we make after the amount of capital against the idea is, where do we go with it? And we think all the time now, we have great relationships with the Indian government. We have great relationships with the Vietnamese government, great relationships with Indonesia, Sri Lanka, because all of these developing countries are like, we want to win. Get my population to be best of class. We're ready to run. Get us to the start line. And we're like, okay. And they're like, okay. And then we're like, okay. And so, you know what I'm saying?
So what are the odds? Handicap the odds. I don't really know what he's saying. No, I kind of know what he's saying. So what are the odds that you think the regulatory landscape in the U.S. changes, and changes meaningfully? Like not.
Here's the problem. The idea that we know what happens to anybody in like an N of 100 or N of 1,000 trial is a crock of horse shit. Okay? It's not statistically significant anymore. I'm just going to put that out there. Okay? We want to like go through this like this like farce of like, oh yeah, no, don't worry, it works on N of 100, let's just go, or N of 1,000, yeah, and it costs $1 billion to get a drug to trial. It's crazy. So, I mean, that has to change. We have to, I mean, look at this room. How much do we think genetic commonality do we have? A lot. But how diverse are we? We're very. And so it's like how we all respond to things are different. And so we have to have a regulatory framework that isn't just based on like Eric Lander's genome. Do you know what I'm saying? Like let's just open.
Do you have any ideas of what we should do? And then I'll move on from this. But like, it's easy to say this system sucks.
Yes,
but
I would like the ability for companies to literally be able to like say, here is a project, and I would like people who are of sound mind and body to be able to just opt in and decide what they want to do, and let an entire regime allow that pathway to exist, and then see what happens. And I honestly think, yes, there will be some cases where this stuff is like is puzzling and terrifying, but I bet you're going to see overwhelmingly amazingly beautiful things of like young, because what you want to find are like young, energetic companies with great ideas who can get to the start line unimpeded. We do that in technology, great things happen. Are there bad consequences to Twitter and Facebook, et cetera? But on the the general
they don't kill people. I mean,
yes, they do. Sure they do.
Okay.
I mean, we have those examples too. So, but this is what I'm saying. The net effect is generally positive. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we could find a way to ease the regulatory oversight where adults can basically go and choose to participate in systems and products and things that can actually meaningfully help them change the trajectory and the course of things that they are suffering from, and then figure out then how to have a more lightweight approval once you have some statistically significant sample size. So maybe like the thing is, you can only do it on 10 people, but you can do it with absolutely no oversight. Then you can go to 20, then you go to 50, then you go to 100, then 1,000, then 10,000, and you show some genetic diversity of the whole thing, and then you can go back and say, I'm ready to go. And you'd probably find ways to do it a lot cheaper. You don't have to, like contract out to a bunch of contract research organizations and spend hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars and hire consultants to go and help you talk to the, the person at the FDA who's all well-meaning, but at the end of the day, it's just the entire system isn't set up for success.
I like that idea. So you had one of your portfolio companies today, Better, announced they were shutting down or something like that. Can you talk a bit about that? And
this is an example of like where we just made fundamental mistakes in the execution of this business. So it is a business that people love and want.
And for everyone, it's a personal health.
It's like a personal healthcare concierge. It'll help you deal with things like everything from the mundane to like the really important stuff. So it's like if you need care managed for your mom, they'll do that for you. But if you're suffering from cystic fibrosis and literally like you need, complex drugs delivered on time, and they'll do that too. So it's like a full turnkey concierge system. And yeah, unfortunately, we could not get it funded. We poured $10 million into this thing. We signed deals with all these payers. We signed, we had thousands of subs. And we're like, why?
What was the price?
It's like $19 a month.
Okay.
But it was like cricket chirping when we tried to raise capital for this thing. And we were just like, we were flabbergasted.
Why? Like, what was the reasons given?
Because I think it is a scary business. It's capital intensive. It'll take a lot of money to scale. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with very sensitive things that relate to those people. I get it. There's complexity, but there's also value in these beautiful things that are happening because you're actually giving them a service that they actually need. These people are suffering in the world. Nobody's helping them. So let's just use some fucking software to help them. But then, you trumpet up and down Sandhill, and that's not what they want to hear. And then you see the shit that gets funded, and you're like, what is going on? It just doesn't make any
Brownie
sense.
delivery at midnight,
It doesn't make any sense to me. And so we struggled, and we struggled, and we struggled. Do
you think that the expectations are, I don't know, without me, you can't tell us how the actual business is doing, but is it that it's an okay business and people just want Slack-style businesses, or
this is about long-term greedy and short-term greedy. This is a business that is, in my opinion, the epitome of long-term greedy. SciApps is another example. Those guys couldn't get funded for 2 years. We funded them within 2 weeks of meeting them. That's a business that took 3 years to get through an 18-month trial at Intermountain. They're running away with it in precision medicine. That's going to be a huge company, long-term greedy, right? Gluco almost went out of business, 3 years, multiple FDA reviews, multiple FDA approvals. Couldn't get funded by other people. We had to recap it once. We had to fund it personally. Long-term greedy, they're winning. And so in all these cases, it tells us that we have to stand up and put in more money or just draw a hard line and just believe. So we had all these vagaries with Better, which was, it was in a small fund. We had, you have to do reserve planning in funds. You have all this capital allocated to other companies. We couldn't rob Peter to pay Paul. Then you have this complex issue of crossing over. Anyways, the mechanics of why this stuff is, the operational mechanics aren't important. But so today when we announced that we had to, deprecate the service, people are tweeting this stuff, and I don't feel this way when other businesses that we've funded go out of business. And I was like, we can't do this to people. So our partners, me, Bridge, Mimoun, were on the phone and we're like, what do we do here? And so now we're like, okay, well, maybe we can throw them another $2 or $3 million and we'll take it from somebody else. And then maybe we can get one of our EIRs, and we're trying to scramble to figure out if there's a solution. But yeah, it's brutal to deal with these things. And that's the honest truth of what we're trying to do now. We're trying to figure out how to save it. We need a really great CEO. Somebody wants to step up.
Yeah. So when should you pull the plug on a healthcare startup? Because some startups just fail. In fact, a lot of startups fail.
I think they have to fail for the right reasons. So, for example, if our trial at Intermountain was either inconclusive to negative, I would have said that was a good shot on goal. We tried, but we weren't able to prove that, having this sort of really great software platform for the oncologist's workflow actually does anything. Great, let's park it, let's sell it, let's move on. In the case of Gluco, if we were not able to show that there were fundamentally measurable A1C reductions, great, walk away, it's done. In the case of asthma and COPD, if we were not able to prove...
Have you walked away from any of these? Or?
Yeah, a bunch of these have been, smaller scale ones that we kind of, to be honest, just sweep under the rug and walk away. Yeah. The other thing, though, I'll tell you is we're kind of a little stubborn. And so, you may, it's I just need just a little thread. Just show me a little. And I'll just pull on it and we'll just ram more money in, because it's kind of you can only lose one extra capital. Right. But again, in this business, if these businesses work, it's not about the money you make. You're just you'll get the opposite side of those tweets, which is man, you're really helping me in a time of need. Or, my dad was 72. I think all the time, he didn't have a service like this when he was 42 and he was diagnosed with diabetes. 10 years of pills, 10 years of insulin, 10 years of dialysis, didn't even understand. We weren't educated enough even to know to put pressure on him. And so now in as our life kind of really scales in our 30s and 40s, our kids are growing up, my dad's not here. And it's fucking frustrating. That to me is so I just need data points where we can just justify being stubborn about stuff. Because like I said, like, it's not like we have a lot of competitors in these businesses. It's just that, sometimes the ecosystem isn't ready to reward them. They're not ready to fund them. They're not ready to take that risk. And so we have to be ready. But we just need any kind of scientific validation that something's working, I think.
How do you feel about direct-to-consumer versus B2B kind of in healthcare?
That's a really great question, too. That's one that we struggle with a lot. We are afraid of these B2C businesses because of the capital intensity around non-core functions of the company, particularly, marketing and acquisition and things like that, which is really just feeding Facebook, cash. And, I love that, and that was great when I worked at Facebook, but the direct-to-payer or working with payers and providers, I think, is the more sustainable pathway. The issue with that is, like, you really do, at least in the short term, have to find a handful of leading institutions that really believe. And we've tried to find these KOLs now that we, that are just like these kindred spirits. They're in Boston, at wherever, or they're at Memorial Sloan Kettering, or they're at HCA Sarah Cannon, and they're like us. That's why they went into healthcare, and they see us, and we're really rough around the edges, but they see a gem of an idea. And then they see the fact that they can save people's lives. And so as long as we have enough of those people in the mix, we'll figure it out, I think.
So do you think that there is a Facebook-sized opportunity in healthcare?
Bigger.
Bigger.
Much bigger.
For
bigger.
one company?
Much bigger, absolutely.
So what does that look like?
The way that we think about this value, again, we have to trade off short-term greedy versus long-term greedy. But I think that value accrues to the fundamental human needs that individuals have. So there's a need to self-actualize, there's a need to communicate, there's a need to have shelter, there's a need around transportation. And all of these things, when you build systems that solve those problems in leveraged ways, you can extract a lot of value from the system. That's clear. Facebook, Uber, Twitter, you name it, whatever. But right at the top of the pyramid is a very, sort of like binary thing, which is the need to be alive. And so I think that the need to be alive is more valuable than the sum of all the needs that sit beneath it. And so the company that actually gives you life, I, for example, expect that in 25 years, what we're talking about is a company that is a direct-to-consumer behemoth that basically says to somebody when they're born, we're going to genetically test you, and we're going to manage you. And every month you're going to take a finger prick of blood, or maybe it's once every 6 months, or you're going to, pee here and, spit there. And we're just going to optimize your well-being, your mental cognition, your physical abilities. We're going to work around diseases. When we see things happen, we're going to edit those out, and we're just going to manage that for you. And, you'll pay that company a monthly subscription fee. That fee could be a percentage of your lifetime income. Why do you care?
But we also need a lot. So that's the managing of the, but then there's the drugs that are going to save us along the ways too, right?
I think we're going to find, like, in that system, that we actually have most of the medicine we need. It's in our food supply.
So it's a software solvable problem.
And we just need to, actually understand what it does to our physiology. Like, the idea, look, yes, my dad, was on 20, 30 years of hardcore, diabetic drugs. Well, he also drank a bottle of Jack Daniels a day. Do you know what I'm saying? That was probably not smart.
Probably not smart.
And we also ate food where when we made it, when my mom made it, and this is not her fault, it starts with a huge plate of white rice, 3 pieces of meat, it's a little bit of lentils. That's also not a longitudinal track, that's not a pathway for success either. So I think that as we understand our physiology better, I think that we'll find that, actually the need for drugs changes if you're actually functionally editing genes at their instantiation of when they perturbate into something that you don't want, and diet. I mean, truly.
Yeah.
And we just don't have enough fine-grained granularity to understand how all these things interact. And as we get more data and we understand that, I suspect that the food supply will do more to solve people's health ailments, if properly managed through software and technology, than most of the drugs that we have today in the pipeline.
It's really interesting. So software is the key to longevity more than
It's the key to
Calico or
it's the key to computation. All of those other things are basically like things you do as a byproduct of mismanagement or undermanagement.
and consumers are going to pay for this, not the payers.
In fact, it may actually be great for governments to actually pay for it. So governments tax your wages, and the governments pay for it because that's the way that they population manage at the highest level, which is really a byproduct of basically optimizing GDP of a country. So you take a developing country like Brazil, and they'll say, you know what, I'm going to spend $1 trillion a year on the health of my population. Because if I do that, they themselves are going to generate $9 trillion a year, and we're going to be the most powerful country in the world. And you only need one country to make that bet. Right?
I mean, some of this seems obvious,
Am I right here?
and I
Am I
would
right?
love it. But maybe some people out here are starting. Does this company have a name yet? It feels like a her kind of thing. I don't know in this terms of all knowing.
I think that we're not yet there for that really to be created. But I think that we're laying a lot of the functional groundwork for it. So, small volume testing systems, whether it's Theranos or anything else, like that problem will be solved in 10 years in a conclusive way that's transparent and known to everybody. Okay, so that's, we'll have that. We'll have some really novel innovations on editing genes and how we deal with it, and also the moral and ethical framework for dealing with that. And I think that will be solved. And then we'll just have better and better computational models for understanding all of these things. And at that point, it'll be an integration exercise for the right company to be able to do that, where there'll be these, I suspect, large open source repositories of information, genetic information and otherwise, and these tools that can be built and used to create that system. And I think that will happen in our lifetime. And that's going to be a fantastic, I think, progression of life. I mean, I don't want to live to 120. I want to live a very productive 85 to 90, Yeah.
Well, Chamath, thank you. You've given us a lot of big ideas, and I particularly the thank you. Woo! I just like how you glossed over solving the moral and ethical framework, because it seems to me like that might not, that you're just listing of all that. There's so many things, but I think it's an exciting time, and to have you guys all tackling it is awesome. But thank you, everyone, and
Thanks
Chamath.
everybody.